Hello, good evening. We're just going to we'll start in a minute or so. Just let anybody else still coming in to join the meeting. Right. Okay. So we'll just get going. So welcome to the North Tyneside Local Plan webinar, and thank you everyone for joining us. It is appreciated to take the time out of your evening. My name's Martin Craddock, and I'll be your presenter for the sessions, supported by a few colleagues from the Planning Policy team. Today's webinar, so we're going to include a short presentation explaining the purpose of the local plan and the key themes that we're consulting on, how the plan will guide development in North Tyneside, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A session where we'll respond to the questions that you were able to submit. Before we begin, I'm not sure how many people are on the meeting, but there's quite a few on this session. So just to make sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible, your microphone and camera are switched off and will remain off throughout the session. The chat function is disabled, but you can submit questions at any time through the Q&A panel, so to the top of your screen, and our team will be moderating questions during the session. We'll aim to answer as many questions as possible during Q&A time after the presentation, but if we receive more questions than we can cover live, we'll follow these up by email, and everybody registered on this session will get an email. To open the Q&A panel, so look for the Q&A icon, which is at the top of your screen, as just mentioned, or if you're on a sort of mobile device, the 3 dots menu should enable you to get to that place. Finally, please note the session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on our North Tyneside voice for anyone who wishes to watch it back or wasn't able to attend today. Okay, thanks again for joining us. We hope you find the session informative. I'll just crack on. Right, so what exactly is the local plan? The local plan is our main planning document. It sets out how land in North Tyneside should be used, where new homes can be built, and where businesses can grow, and how we protect our green spaces and local environment. It's also the framework that guides decision on planning applications. The local plan isn't something that we can choose to have or not have, and every council must have one. It has to be kept up to date and aligned with national policy. Plan is like a roadmap to the future, a plan that helps us manage growth in a coordinated way rather than reacting to development proposals one at a time. The local plan we currently use was adopted in 2017 and it looked ahead to 2032, but quite a lot has changed since then. So now we're preparing this new local plan that runs to 2042. Some of the biggest changes include, since 2017, the climate emergency, which the council declared in 2019, the need to support nature recovery and biodiversity, and a growing focus on addressing issues such as inequality, the need for healthier and more inclusive communities. All of these mean that we need a plan today that reflects our current priorities and not those from a decade ago. Another reason for a new plan is that national policy has changed. So since December 2024, particularly, the government introduced an update to its national planning policy framework. That included mandatory housing targets that mean we must plan for a certain number of homes each year, and new greenbelt rules that say that councils, if we cannot meet housing needs inside of our urban area, that the need for homes should be considered an exceptional circumstance that would require review of the greenbelt. We also know that housing delivery in North Tyneside is falling short, and if we do nothing, we risk more speculative applications where developers are choosing sites they want rather than the community helping to shape choices about growth. So essentially, a strong up-to-date plan helps us to stay in control of the growth that happens in the borough. The timeline for preparing this plan, so we began the process back in February last year, 2025, and then had a consultation on vision issues and options in August 2025, and that received just over 300 comments. We're now at the initial draft plan stage, which obviously started in January and will run to the end of February. And then later this year, we'll have further consultation between September and October, subject to everything sort of progressing, where we'll publish a revised draft plan with more detail. And then, once submitted to government, that plan go to an examination in public that we'd expect through 2027 that an independent planning inspector would oversee. And finally, we aim to, subject to the outcome of that examination process, have a new plan adopted by early 2028. So we already have one round of community involvement that's completed, and the current draft has evolved from that initial engagement. So the plan isn't just about housing numbers or red lines on the map. It's also about sort of the quality of life we want for people living here today and for future generations. The plan addresses issues like climate change and flooding risks, infrastructure in terms of our roads and public transport, health and community spaces, protecting green spaces and wildlife sites, supporting regeneration, especially and particularly in town centres and other communities, and helping to guide future investment. And all of these factors shape how and where development can happen. So fortunate that North Tyneside has actually seen, in terms of economic growth, pretty strong job growth over the last 10 years. So there has been 10,000 new jobs located within the borough over that period. We expect more growth in sort of sectors like advanced manufacturing, health, finance and technology. At the River Tyne investment zone, there's an ongoing focus on offshore and clean energy industry. At the A19, there's the recent Northeast AI growth zone, which we expect to be centred on the Cobalt Business Park within the A19 economic corridor. And the plan helps us make sure that there's enough land, enough employment land for the right type of businesses to expand and create new jobs. In terms of population growth, population projections suggest we'll see between 17,000 and 23,000 more residents by 2042. But we're also seeing major demographic changes. So the number of residents aged over 65 is expected to grow significantly by sort of around 30%. But at the same time, population projections at the moment say that the number of school-age children, so kind of 0 to 15 broadly, will fall by 4,000 to 5,000. So that's an 11% decline. So this means future housing needs will clearly be changing. Some residents may need accessible or adaptable homes, smaller homes, supported living options. But at the same time, many younger people will still struggle to find a home to live here. And if we don't plan for their needs and the overall needs of the borough, they may need to move away. And obviously issues such as affordability continue to be an issue. The government's minimum housing requirement for North Tyneside is 995 homes a year. At the moment, we're currently building around 550 homes a year. There's also about 4,000 families on the waiting list for affordable homes, and our evidence indicates we need over 400 new affordable homes per year to meet needs. So that's within the overall sort of total housing needs for the borough. So to meet these overall needs to 2042, plan is looking to around 18,450 homes that it needs to find. So to choose possible development sites, we look at 3 main tests in terms of basically starting with which sites are available, are the sites suitable, and will they be achievable and deliver the homes that are needed over the plan period. In looking at sites, we consider issues like flood risk, wildlife, access, in terms of roads and other forms of access, heritage, landscape impact, and whether the necessary infrastructure can realistically be delivered to meet the impacts of development. Through 2025, alongside the last stage of consultation, we ran a call for sites exercise that invited residents and landowners to submit land for consideration. This gave us a long list of potential sites which we've assessed. As the local plan progresses, if other possible sites are identified and could be available in the plan period, they will also be considered for inclusion in the next stage of the local plan consultation as we move into that next year, later this year. So we've tried to focus development in the urban area first, and there are around 11,000 homes included in this area, with about 9,200 on specific sites, and there's about another 1,600 homes on windfall sites. That this would be sites that are either too small to allocate or on land that we basically don't yet know about being available for housing. And some of the examples of housing development within the urban area include Smithstock, which is a large site at the River Tyne that's still a priority, that we'd expect to see 500 to 700 homes built over the planned period. Tyne Brand at the Fish Quay is a major sort of opportunity where expecting around 140 homes could be delivered. And there's been recent planning permissions granted that former Queen Alexandra College, that in total there are about 81 homes on that site. And the draft plan also identifies smaller opportunities on some other brownfield land and some areas of green space within the urban area. Meanwhile, we've also got sites such as Timeview Park in Benton that may and is expected to become available during the planned period and has been promoted by the landowner there. At the same time, sites like the Esso site in North Shields is owned by the Port of Tyne. They expect to bring forward economic development on the site, and that sort of location isn't presently available for housing development. So in total, that means that we still have, with that delivery in the urban area, a shortfall and a need for about 8,000 extra homes. And that essentially is what triggers the need to review parts of the Greenbelt in North Tyneside. So in the northwest, we're looking carefully at 4 potential growth areas. These include, obviously within the northwest, there's currently a range of close-knit villages, and it's important that the plan can protect their character. Any development in this area will need to be proportionate to the scale of the area, but at the same time supporting better bus services and shops and community facilities, and finding ways to provide high quality open spaces as part of the developments. And overall, these are changes that could and would need to deliver benefits for the whole community. In the northwest, the Green Belt has a vital role mainly in preventing the merging of Newcastle North Tyneside urban area and Cramlington. Clearly that function has to remain. And in total across the northwest, there's about 3,000 homes, but about 3,000 homes that may be possible. To the northeast, there are 2 main areas of possible growth, so southwest of Ursden and then north of Whitley Bay. So development in this area clearly needs to safeguard character of Ursden, need to improve access to the countryside as far as possible, strengthen the links to the coast and Whitley Bay town centre, and at the same time provide the necessary support and facilities as part of development, whilst also managing traffic impacts and securing sustainable transport. Altogether, there's about 1,900 homes, so 1,900 homes in this area, and a new Greenbelt boundary would follow the Bryadine corridor, which would need to be reinforced as a key sort of landscape buffer. And then finally, land north of Backworth could support a sizable new community of around 2,000 to 3,000 homes. So this area, with the right investment, could have strong transport links, including possible access to the Northumberland line and creation of a new public transport hub, walking and cycling routes to Killingworth, the A19 corridor, and Cramlington will be important, and development here will need to deliver essentially significant open space and biodiversity improvements, to expect a requirement for local shops and community facilities, and sensitive design that respects Backworth's historic character, whilst protecting the role of the Greenbelt, which in this area in particular is about protecting the function of separating Tyneside from southeast Northumberland and Seg Hill, and Cramlington in particular. So in terms of next steps and what happens next, after consultation on this initial proposals, more details will be included as the local plan progresses. So during this consultation that we're undertaking now, we're collecting feedback from residents, businesses, various landowners and the statutory organisations such as National Highways, the Environment Agency, Natural England, in terms of setting out the scale and possible locations for growth and what their feedback and comments are on that. We'll then be updating, developing further the evidence base and looking at the site-specific infrastructure requirements in more detail, how walking, wheeling, cycling and public transport improvements are delivered on each of the sites, specific road impacts and how they can be addressed and improved where necessary, ecological mitigation, and the development of concept plans for the major sites that will show more clearly where different elements of development, open space, other facilities could or should be included on sites. And all of this work, pulling together the feedback and the further evidence, will be essentially then published and included in the publication draft local plan that would come later this year. Then it's worth remembering that subject to the final plan being adopted, there'll be, beyond the plan adoption, a need for further planning applications and with their own consultation and decision-making processes before any development on any site would actually start. So thanks again for joining today and for taking an interest in the plan, and appreciate everybody taking time out of their evening to come to this session. Obviously our aim overall with the local plan is that at least to support sustainable growth in a balanced way that protects North Tyneside while making sure that we can meet the needs for growth that we understand are required for the borough. Thank you if you've already submitted comments, and if you're still to respond, please make sure that you do either through the engagement hub or get in touch with the planning team via email or through the phone line. Okay, so I'll now pause and we'll move on to the question and answer sessions if any questions have been coming through. I think Annabelle or somebody else in the team, give me a shout. But at the moment, I can't hear anything. Have a look at the Q&A.
Is that working?
Hello, there you are.
Hello?
Annabelle, can you hear me? Annabelle? Hopefully everybody else has been able to hear me. Right.
We're not muted by you, are we?
Apologies for the delay.
Hi, sorry about that. Just having some technical issues there. So can you hear me now? Is that all right?
Yes.
Right. So the first question is, most of the projected population growth will be in the 65 plus. Will this be reflected in the mix of homes? That's the first question.
Yes, insofar as we have local plan policy that will set out our overall needs. In terms of the housing delivery, then there's clearly a mix that will happen on most sites. What tends to happen across the borough is that we'll have a growing need for specialist and other types of homes, but there'll also be a large number of growing elderly people who stay in their current housing. So it'll be a balance, I think, as we go forwards. And clearly, in terms of what gets delivered, it often is, these schemes, we have affordable housing requirements and the council will be seeking affordable homes that meet needs, but we also have essentially the market and what developers find that residents and people who want to live in North Tyneside choose to buy. So the housing delivery is a balance of those two things at the end of the day, where the most mobile element of the population are new households that are forming, whilst there'll be older household groups that, as they move into later life, will be looking to downsize, and the market will reflect that over time, but there'll be a balance, I think, overall. if you're asking the question, Will, you're still on mute.
Sorry, thank you. The second question was, how was the initial plan publicised? They were concerned that they didn't hear about this until January.
So the last phase of consultation, I assume that, does that mean in terms of the vision and the options consultation?
Yeah. Yes.
Right, okay, so that was a very similar process to this time, really. So there was notification through Engagement Hub and to everybody who was present, members of the North Tyneside, our North Tyneside Voice website. The last plan was, each stage has been preceded by articles within the Our North Tyneside magazine. At that point, we didn't do direct letter notifications because there wasn't any particular household group, that plan at that point didn't have specific locations for growth, so there was no particular areas to target in that respect. But there was a press release, there was 2 articles in the Chronicle associated with the last local plan consultation last summer. And we did the same range of events at libraries, materials available at the libraries and online we have this time.
Right, cheers. And then the third question was, what do you class as affordable homes?
Okay, so in planning terms, an affordable home there's a specific definition within national planning policy. And where a home is affordable, it's secured in that tenure basically in perpetuity, so for the rest of its sort of life. Essentially, it's either a specific social rented tenure where the home is built and let at a specific sort of social rented rates, or their affordable rent, which is basically to rent at a discount below market rates, which is normally has to be at least 80% below market rate. There's also discount market homes to buy, where the specific discount is agreed and it's often between 60 and 70% below market value to buy, and then that has to be passed on to future buyers. And then affordable homes would also be shared ownership tenures, where you might have a council or a registered provider who owns a portion of this home, and then someone would either rent or buy into that property over a number of years. And generally, there's associated with affordable homes, there's normally, well, pretty much always an eligibility criteria that comes along with it in terms of local connection tests and earning potential.
Right, and then the next question is, we have a question on Annisford Farm and the impact on wildlife and the infrastructure, and particularly on Moor Farm roundabout, and also the Annisford roundabout. And also this question also asks, why has this land been sold for development, as it seemed there is a contradiction in policy?
Right, so Annisford Farm is, that particular site was allocated in the last local plan in 2017. So that, which I know doesn't change in terms of the fact that there are proposals for development coming forwards now. Homes England are now the owner of that site, and they, as we currently understand it, have a view to bring forward a scheme for its development. The land has been owned by the council for a number of years and was bought specifically as part of the housing revenue account to deliver housing in North Tyneside to meet the borough's needs. So it's essentially been a very long-standing potential housing development site. Every site has issues, and that one will need sort of addressing in terms of achieving biodiversity net gain, managing the traffic impacts, ensuring that it delivers the infrastructure that's required. But that particular site has been a long-standing potential development site.
Yes, and then the next question is, how do you plan to enhance wildlife and green spaces by getting rid of these green spaces?
Right, so there are there's a whole range of things that need to be done clearly. So to start with the developments that are identified need to go through a process of identifying the least harmful pieces of land. So there's an entire hierarchy of selection to go through. Essentially, where there are wildlife designations or other biodiversity designations, in the main, the sites are required to obviously stay away from those locations. Where we're looking at potential development sites, if we're talking about agricultural land or other generally sort of amenity grassland, they have a biodiversity value, but it's not as significant. Sometimes in some locations, sometimes it's the brownfield sites that have sort of almost rewilded that have more value than an agricultural field that's farmed on a regular basis. But of course, in terms of particularly things like farmland birds and other species that use those spaces, there are important impacts that need to be addressed. Every site that comes forward will need to provide and undertake appropriate assessments in terms of the ecology that exists on the sites and undertake habitat surveys of what exists on the sites. Every site and every development by law has to achieve a 10% biodiversity net gain. So that's applying the metric that's been set nationally in terms of establishing the value of habitat before a development and the value afterwards. And there's a metric that is applied through government policy that requires that must be 10% better once the scheme's been delivered, and there's a monitoring framework then that shows that any improvements and enhancements that are done either on site or off site managed and delivered over a 30-year period. And then obviously within each scheme, it's about moving from maybe a site that's farmland to a site that has a combination of essentially housing development plus open spaces that deliver direct sort of meaningful benefits for recreation and ecology.
Right, so then the next question is, the draft local plan with the areas proposed encircles Ersdon, damaging its identity and conservation, effectively swamping into Shire Moor and Wellfield.
So there is more development in the vicinity of Ersdon. I would say overall that's something that we do recognise, and there's a whole range of measures essentially that will need to be taken as any plans are developed that ensure that the impacts on Ersdon from its character and conservation setting are addressed. As a starting point, none of the developments actually sort of impact or directly merge with Ersdon, or certainly that won't be the case once the sort of plans are fully developed out. And then it'll be a matter of how essentially the edges and the setting that the edges of those developments that are closer to Ersdon are managed, and the design will need to be properly sort of developed to reflect and achieve that. But that's something that needs working through in terms of which sites are in the final plan, how the concept plans and the approach to those sites is actually set out and achieved.
Right, the next question is, have there been any plans for infrastructure, so things such as GPs and dentists?
So obviously we have an understanding broadly of the sort of current availability and supply and location and proximity of sites to existing facilities. The plan process is sort of phased though, so we can know where sites are best located to be near existing facilities. Once we've established those locations, there's then the next phase, which is developing in more depth the new infrastructure that will be needed in given locations to address shortfalls that would occur. So certainly when you look at some of the bigger, like the North Ackworth location, that site we know will need its own, is likely to need some form of new local centre that would then provide the point where you would look to include an opportunity for sort of an extra GP's practice or surgery and branch. And there's a process where the plan basically provides that opportunity to work with the NHS and the health providers in terms of, well, this is the growth that North Tyneside is having. These are the places where it's going to be happening. And then they can start to build that into their own programs of investment, secure investment as well from the developments themselves to identify the facilities and bring forward the facilities we need. But it's a process that takes a long time. So the plans will set that out, and then there'll be, if those sites do come forward and are delivered, a period of delivery where things will have to happen and come forwards.
Right, and the next question is, what happens if and when the majority oppose these plans? If the council need to show they are planning to build all of these houses, do you just ignore people's objections?
So local plans are a process and they have to involve consultation, and they have to reflect the needs of the whole borough. So there is a balance. There are objectors and there are also people who will be buying the homes. So I think what I would say at the moment is it isn't the case that it's a referendum. A plan is an evidence-based process to meet needs for growth. There's an option to turn around and not have a local plan, but then we won't have a plan to manage growth, and we won't in the long run be able to manage and prevent the developments that the landowners and developers seek to bring forward. So that in the end is a choice that could be taken. But in terms of it being a referendum, it's not really a vote. It's a process based on what we need and finding the most appropriate and sustainable way to achieve what the borough needs.
Cheers. And then the next question is, who will determine what gets built, where, you or the developers?
So where we have a local plan that's up to date and establishes what's needed and the infrastructure that's required and what we expect from each development, then the plan is the tool that then guides decisions that developers will guide decisions on planning applications that developers submit. So the authority manages the process. It's the landowners and the developers in the main who control the sites, fund the development, fund the infrastructure, and bring it forwards. The plan is our opportunity to control that process. If we don't have the plan, sorry, I probably just essentially over time, our ability to prevent development coming forwards is eroded because we don't have the homes that are needed. There'll be appeals. We'll lose those appeals because we haven't got a housing land supply, and things will happen in an ad hoc manner. So the plan is our opportunity to control that process and achieve the most sustainable growth that we can based on the current requirements.
Right, I've got another question. Why are you closing the school and wide open when the area is being expanded?
Okay, so I'll do my best to answer it. I'm not the education specialist here in terms of the needs that they have, but there are two separate processes here in terms of current shortfalls and costs associated with maintaining schools that aren't basically operating viably, and then the long-term change and growth in the borough. Even with the plan, the population projections that exist are still likely to happen. So building homes doesn't change the fact that we'll have fewer children in North Tyneside in 20 years, but it will maybe mean that those children aren't exactly where they are now. So a current house with 2 or 3 5 to 12-year-olds will still be there in 20 years, but those kids won't be in school anymore, whereas there'll be a new family that might have a couple of kids somewhere else. But overall, across the whole borough, across the 110,000 homes that are already here, there'll be less children in every single one of those homes based on the current projections. So that's a process that will need to be monitored, because I don't know, things may change with birth rates in the next 10 years as we don't know that what will happen in the future, but there's a problem now in terms of school places and viable schools that needs to be addressed. There will be housing growth. Housing development makes contributions that gives the council funds if it needs to invest in education provision, and where necessary, based on where homes are in the new plan, if they're too far basically from existing schools, then there'll be land safeguarded for new school provision in those locations, but delivery only happens if of schools if monitoring identifies that that's the requirement in terms of total space and not disturbing the overall sort of viability of our existing schools. So it's a process that basically the two separate things that need to be managed as we go forwards. But as it stands at the moment, and given particularly that most of the sites right now are draft for consultation, they're not specific known sites that are definitely going to happen. They're not proposals that will change, as far as I understand it, that can change what the council needs to decide to do about its existing schools, the existing challenges that there are.
Right, Chairs, I've got a next question on biodiversity. So will the biodiversity created be in the immediate local area or be offset somewhere else?
So there's so they have to follow a hierarchy when developers come forward with a site or any form of development, where first and foremost it needs to be on site. So within the development itself, as far as possible. Where that isn't possible, immediately adjacent, and then follow basically the hierarchy, the further right you go. In terms of net gain and the costs, the further away it is, the more expensive it is. So there's kind of an incentive to do it on site as far as possible, and obviously that's better overall in terms of mitigation. And it'll depend on each site really in terms of how much is feasible on site. In the main, the majority of the development we've got at the moment, my understanding is we'll be able to deliver improvements either on site or immediately adjacent. As you go into the urban area, that can be harder, where you might look for higher densities development, then those sites might need to offset their potential impacts to slightly further afield. But that's the specific detail that will evolve as we come up with concept plans, working with the developers, and come up with the more specific proposals for the next draft of the plan.
Chair, so the next question is, are there any existing derelict or empty properties that can be brought back into use to add to the numbers of available housing?
There are some, certainly, and we've identified some where known, such as the Time Brand site down at the Fish Quay and other locations. I think also sites like Dock Road near to Smithstock, sort of mix of sort of industrial and vacant units that are included in the plan. So there's a range of sites identified that would include sort of derelict, vacant, potentially vacant property. But there aren't lots of them. But if there are others that we've missed, then we'll look to include those, or they'll come forward as part of the windfall allowance that's included within the overall plan, where there's included an allowance of about 1,600 homes that essentially would be those sort of sites that either are there now or could become vacant or derelict through the plan period, where we'd expect sort of brownfield for the redevelopment of sites.
Okay, and then the next one is, to what extent is the North Tyneside local plan likely to be impacted by the future regional spatial development strategy, particularly in terms of key development sites?
So the new regional spatial development strategy is, at this point, something that's starting to be looked at, and the North East Combined Authority is sort of that regional body that will deliver the spatial development strategy, are sort of still bringing together their team effectively that would do the regional plan. As it stands, we don't know exactly what approach that will set out, but it will still need to deal with the scale of growth in each district, borough, county of the northeast area that the National Planning Policy Framework sets out, and which the local plan's trying to address. So as it progresses, the spatial development strategy will establish a framework, come up with a framework for growth. It will hopefully help us in terms of some of the strategic infrastructure needs that the North Tyneside local plan growth will need to sort of benefit from and require for overall development in the future. But there's no, at this point in time, the way and the approach the SDS takes to growth, we don't expect or think is likely to conflict with our local plan or fundamentally change what's needed to be delivered in North Tyneside. But plans, there always needs to be sort of an iterative process when there's sort of two different plans that will have a relationship to each other.
So the next question is, Cobalt Business Park and other areas of the borough have empty office buildings. Can this land be redesigned for housing?
So Cobalt does, quite right, has a few empty office buildings at the moment. Obviously one kind of literally next door to the council's building. There are things change over time when it comes to Cobalt, and it's, as it stands at the moment, we haven't received any specific sort of view or position from basically the landowner and the sort of people who manage the business park that they're looking to convert or transfer it over to housing development. I think any given site or office complex raises a number of challenges in terms of doing that. And at the moment, so for example, we're expecting I think the police to take up a building that's sort of just to the rear of the council building at Cobalt. And as we look ahead now, one of the things that we still need to understand, see how it pans out, is how this AI growth zone investment sort of affects Cobalt. So, because the intention of the view and the sort of strategic and one of the regional sort of strategies at the moment is that we get investment into Cobalt for these sort of major AI data centers that then also sort of spark other investment, and that's something that's still being progressed through as a sort of major sort of economic investment proposal, which in theory at the moment means that Cobalt is like at the forefront of that change. So it's not a site right now where we can say, let's just forget about it and put houses there.
Right, the next question is, can you outline the role and purpose of safeguarded land within the proposed draft local plan?
Right, so when you define green belt, you can define basically the boundary of green belt that is intended to be land permanently protected from development until there's a green belt review. And then there's land that's safeguarded from development for the plan period that would then be considered in future years, subject to that land ever being suitable and reasonable as a, sorry, my light's gone off. You can see me, I think. Can you see me? That'll do. Never mind, I'll sit in the dark, sorry. What was I saying? So it's green belt, it would be the land that's sort of to be retained permanently. Safeguarded land is land that is important to be kept open, but isn't defined as a firm long-term boundary. So there would be a need to review safeguarded land in future years. Within the review that we've set out, the main reason why there's either safeguarded land or greenbelt is the definition of a strong permanent boundary that we could use. So where we've taken the Briardean corridor essentially as that long-term boundary, then that's the greenbelt boundary, and the land we want to protect that's south of that boundary is safeguarded. It's the same in a few other locations where you look at a boundary, that's the sort of greenbelt boundary, and then where there isn't a clear sort of permanent feature that of a sort of structure that would define a boundary, then the land that's within it is safeguarded at this point. If that hopefully makes sense.
Right, the next one is kind of all about sustainability and as well as kind of house building and the density. So how sustainable do the new developments have to be? Can the council require developers to build denser housing? So for example, not detached but terrace housing or attractive flats. This would reduce the need for acquiring land.
Yeah, so I think the plan, so we do something that's a relatively new development, certainly from the last local plan, is there are higher density requirements, particularly in locations within about 800 meters of potential metro train stations. So we're sort of seeking 40 to 50 dwellings per hectare there versus a more average for some of our like housing developments, sort of 27 to 30 dwellings per hectare. So yes, the locations that are more accessible to basically high frequency public transport will be required to identify higher densities. So if you're looking, once you get sort of over 40 to 50 dwellings per hectare, that does require sort of more like sort of townhouse terraces and things like that. And so that will be part of the plans that we'd expect to come forwards from developers to make the best, most efficient use of sites. And then hopefully, obviously, it gives you a better opportunity to get green space into the remaining areas as well. But again, it's always a mix. So ideally, you'd have lots of like higher density homes everywhere. That isn't entirely the market in North Tyneside. So people don't, basically there isn't as many people who would want to buy a flat in North Tyneside as say in Newcastle city centre. That's just the way it kind of works. So the delivery that comes forward will have to sort of be a balance of that in terms of higher densities, absolutely, where locations are sustainable. But there'll still be a need for the homes to be essentially deliverable in that they are homes that people want.
And then just to add on to the kind of theme of sustainability, someone's asking, will sustainability issues be required of the developers, such as solar panels and insulation?
Right. So we looked in terms of like the efficiency and the sort of energy on-site energy generation of homes. That's something we have looked at requiring, and there is policy talking about that within the main sort of draft plan. As it stands at the moment, there are changes with building regulations that the government are introducing. So so even today, if you look at sort of many of the very newest homes that are being built in North Tyneside, they often will have solar panels on the roof. They are increasingly being required to have sort of higher standards of insulation and efficiency. And as of pretty imminently, government should be introducing higher standards again. So at the moment, we expect, and those higher standards, essentially, my understanding of the statement, that they'll achieve basically net zero ready. So there'll be homes that will still require energy from the grid, from the electricity grid, but as the grid decarbonizes, those homes themselves would then become net zero. So at the moment, that's our approach, where we'll basically monitor what happens with national regulations and apply those, and then essentially still have the same standards as other locations in the northeast. But there's other additional policy, like sort of the more, not exactly softer, but the things that will need to be sort of considered in terms of layout and design of development, the orientation of properties, making sure that they sort of generally apply principles of sustainable construction and addressing climate adaptation mitigation as part of their approach to how sites are sort of built out, making sure that we get adequate and meaningful sort of tree planting as part of development and other sort of landscaping features, so that all of that is incorporated into a scheme to make it as sustainable and responsive to climate change issues as possible.
Right, okay, we've had a few questions with regards to traffic. So one of them is the old A1 runs through wide open. This cannot be expanded. How will the traffic cope?
So in the Norfolk, so in each location where there's, well, to start off with, the whole plan is going to require and need to be informed by a strategic transport and traffic model. So there will be work that we'll be undertaking now that it's clear, it's sort of trying to establish where the growth happens, that has to look at each location and the traffic that's generated. Before we get to that point, that part of what the concept plan work and the infrastructure work that needs to be done will be, how do you basically drive down the number of vehicles that come off each site first? So that needs to be in terms of the design of the development, what it's close to, what can be provided on site to minimize the number of journeys. How do you sort of deliver and provide some basically supported public transport infrastructure to make schemes sustainable? And then, yes, there'll be additional traffic and cars coming off each site, understanding the number, how many there'll be each day, each hour through the peak periods, and where those numbers potentially essentially exceed capacities, what needs to be done and when in terms of the road infrastructure to improve them. There'll be issues, and that can be a thing that can hold up or prevent a development ever happening if there's a scheme where the traffic flows are more than is capable of being accommodated safely on the road network. And that's something that in each site will need to be properly reviewed and considered, and there won't be any planning permissions granted until there are solutions to issues like that.
Thank you. And then another transport question is, can the local plan demand a street layout which enhances direct connection to public transport and direct bike routes? So demand can enter the cul-de-sac estates, or what layouts?
So that there's more permeable streets and routes that you can get through a development without. So yes, and that is, there are principles that exist now in terms of the council's like cycling design guide and other sort of highway and transport guidance that we already have. We're developing and looking to do some consultation a bit later on this year about specific design guidance and design codes, which a key part of that is around how streets and layouts enable movement in the most sort of effective way possible so that you can get to and from properties. But I think it's true that even whilst many of the principles are known, there are still developments that are happening too often where you might get to the end of a driveway and you just want to sort of hop over a fence or something and to get out, but you have to walk too far around to get to the place that you need to be. So people tend to get in their car. So there are things and issues like that still need to be fixed and resolved better once we sort of consider the details of planning proposals. But that's part of where we are looking to publish and develop more guidance and clearer policy around what's required when developments happen in detail.
Right, and then the next one is, it's also traffic related. How can North Tyneside sustain such population growth when we already have significant problems with congestion at peak times, a shortage of GPs, dentists, and the overall strain on the NHS?
Okay, I think I'll probably move up. So the traffic bit, I feel that was kind of possibly covered in terms of how we'll have to obviously manage that and manage the road infrastructure. In terms of other issues, the borough is growing, so the population forecasts exist, and the housing need exists. The growing elderly population exists, and they will need the healthcare required for that growth. As we prepare the plan, that informs basically the locations where development will happen. It will provide through, because we have a community infrastructure levy that provides a fund to enable investment in new facilities and including new health facilities. The thing that the plan doesn't do and can't do is what is obviously a national, local, overall issue in terms of, well, how many doctors are there? Is there enough money in the health service to fund everything that's needed as the country grows over the next 20 years? But the plan and housing provision and being prepared for the changes that the borough might see is part of tackling that in the best way possible, essentially. And the other issues we have to obviously work with those other service providers so they understand the needs locally. But funding, availability of doctors, that comes through obviously other routes in terms of how the overall health service ultimately is managed.
So I think we only
Are there
have
any-
time for 2 more left. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. We've only got time for 2 more left. Just we've been 4 minutes too. So this is the second last one. What is the timescale for the local plan?
So timescale for preparing the local plan is this consultation will end, but it's not the end of the engagement period, if you like. So it will be end of February will be sort of the main closing date for consultation. Will ongoing preparation then basically of the plan through to autumn, when we'll publish that next draft with more details. Once that draft has been published, that will be consulted on again for a 6-week period. Any final sort of comments and feedback then are submitted along with the draft plan to government, who will then basically appoint the independent planning inspector, who will hold an examination. We expect that process will take about a year. So once that happens through 2027, it would be early 2028 that the local plan would be adopted. So we're still talking sort of 2 years-ish from now. Is that right? Basically before this plan as a policy document is adopted. Any given site in the plan would then require submission of planning applications, which could come forwards soon, or it could be several years before we get those planning applications. It depends pretty much on how the landowners and developers are able to bring forward sites, if there's particular legal agreements or other issues that need to be resolved before actual development, actual applications could happen. And then there'll be the whole process of establishing that there's particular impacts from each site and the detail of what's proposed align with what the plan says, and address all the latest evidence at that point when those planning applications are in. So that's the timetable in terms of plan making, and then applications a little bit uncertain. Obviously the intention is, and our expectation is, that overall each of these sites come on stream in terms of delivering the borough's housing needs, and obviously build out through now sort of 17-year period through to 2042. Okay.
Right, and I think we've just got time for just one more question, and this one is, does the council maintain a register of sites suitable for co-housing and or self-build? If so, are these included in the local plan allocation or in addition to?
There is a self and custom house build register that we've maintained, have had a legal duty to maintain since 2016, I think. So that forms part of the evidence of demand for homes in North Tyneside. So overall, at the moment, there are some locations where you think, oh, well, that could be a possible point where you could have some self-build housing. At the moment, our policy approach is that we try and secure that where required as part of some of the bigger sites, but there are some smaller sites that could potentially provide some opportunity for self-build.
Okay, cheers. I think that was all the time we'll have for questions, but if the questions weren't answered, then we'll get back to people via email, just to make sure that all the questions asked in the Q&A are answered, but via email, because we haven't had enough time.
Yeah. Okay. So there's still a few more, so we'll do that over the next couple of days to get those responses out. Okay, right. So that's all for now. Thanks everybody for joining. I don't know when this will be up online as a recording, but it'll go on the website on the Engagement Hub at some point next week, I would expect, possibly before everything gets sort of but obviously if there's any other questions that people want to ask, then you can drop us an email at planning.policy@northtyneside.gov.uk. But otherwise, thanks very much for your time. And hopefully look forward to your responses and any more engagement as we go on this year. Okay, thanks very much. Good night.
Thank you very much, everyone.